Earlier, I was joined by the deputy editor of the US Election Watch website, James Cahill, from the ABC's Planet America program, Chas Licciardello, and Georgina Downer, adjunct fellow at the Institute of Public Affairs. Well, I'd like to start on the demographics and look at exactly how Donald Trump pulled this win off. Chas Licciardello, I'm sure you've been obsessing over the numbers all week. How did we end up here with this result?
It was basically a complete collapse of Hillary Clinton's vote. And the number which really stands out to me is we were talking the whole last month about white college-educated women and how they were going to desert Donald Trump. They did not desert Donald Trump. In fact, Hillary won less white college-educated women than Al Gore won in 2000. So basically, Donald Trump kept the Republican vote, and Hillary lost black women, she lost Hispanic men, and she didn't gain white college-educated women at all.
That was a surprise to me as well. Georgina Downer, what about you? How do you see that turnout result for her in terms of women?
Yeah, it's really surprising. It goes against a lot of the forecasts that were saying that Donald Trump was hemorrhaging the support of women, and there were famously maps of the United States if only women voted, and it was a sea of blue for the Democrats. But the reality was, just as Chas explained, women did vote for Trump, not obviously in quite the same numbers as they did for Hillary, but not nearly as bad as was forecast.
Would you agree with that, James Cahill? I also noticed that Hillary Clinton only managed to get 65% of Hispanics. Was that another failure in her campaign?
Yes, I think it was, and my two fellow panelists are absolutely right. I really thought that Ms. Clinton's persistent 3 to 4% lead, that outside of the news cycles that tended to move the polls a bit, and I suspected that was white college-educated women leaving the Republican voting coalition and moving over to her side, and clearly that did not happen. And it reminds me of some work that a couple of Emory University professors did in 2015, which they noticed that partisanship was changing to, instead of an affinity or a closeness to your party, it was a negative partisanship. It was a loathing and dislike of the other party and its partisans. And it seems that has really dug in America, and that as controversial as your candidate can be, you still find the ability to loathe the other party and stay together. And I think that was the biggest surprise of this election. How
did the urban-rural divide play into that as well?
Oh, it played in it tremendously, although that has long been there. There's long been a big divide between city mice and country mice, but it was particularly pronounced in this election. Early analysis by the Washington Post found that Ms. Clinton won over 90% of urban core voters, and that Donald Trump won between 75 and 90% of rural, small city and medium city. A very, very stark contrast. Not so much red and blue state, but blue big cities and red just about everything else.
And Chas, was this a mistake on our part in the media? Were we too willing to accept or assume that Hillary Clinton would do better among women and Hispanics as well?
Look, I certainly was wrong. I think it's just a case of the polls. Every single poll suggested otherwise. Well, not every single one, but every single one that we paid attention to suggested otherwise. And when the polls are wrong, so the mice will be wrong too.
Yeah. Georgina Downer, no doubt some of your former colleagues in the Foreign Affairs Department are sending some pretty interesting cables this week. What do you think the Trump presidency will look like? Can he actually become a decent president?
Well, I think his acceptance speech was incredibly optimistic and conciliatory, and I think we need to take great hope from that he will be a successful president, not just for the United States, but for the world. I actually think his policy platform in the main, and I do have some reservations about his protectionist trade agenda, but in the main shows a lot of promise. He is adopting a lot of that Reaganite doctrine of small government, low taxes, and his immigration policies. While he was throwing out a bit of red meat to his base about building the wall to Mexico, really all he was advocating in the end was implementing the letter of the immigration law. And you can understand from the context of Australia why that appealed to so many people in the United States.
do you agree with the analysis that the reason many women voted for him was because they had such a dislike of Hillary Clinton, or do you think that it was a matter of policy?
There were two factors, I think, why Trump was successful. One was the never Hillary vote, and the other was he attracted a lot of previous Democrat blue-collar workers who'd never voted Republican before, but decided that the Democrat Party really had never delivered for them, and they'd give Trump a go. They liked his appeal to a traditional American culture and values, and of course that protectionist rhetoric did sort of seem instinctively right to a lot of those blue-collar workers.
Chaz, what do you think?
Reince Priebus said to some journalists after the election that their internal polling said that they were losing comfortably until the last couple of weeks. So I would suggest that maybe WikiLeaks and the FBI in particular, the shenanigans of the FBI, probably had a big impact because it would remind a lot of voters about the corruption and the dishonesty issues that a lot of people associated with Hillary Clinton.
James, can we say with any certainty at this point what the Trump presidency will look like?
I don't think Donald Trump knows what type of president Donald Trump is going to be. I think he prides himself on his unpredictability. He certainly is an ideological free thinker. As far as I think it'll be fairly easy for him to say he implemented some part of his agenda because he was often on both sides of many topics. And I think he's also going to find that I think all the Republicans are going to find that it's much easier to be in opposition than it is to be in government. And some of Mr. Trump's positions cut right through the heart of long-standing Republican policy, particularly on trade and immigration. And it's going to be interesting to see how that conflict is managed. And, you know, it's worth remembering he ran as much against the Republican Party as he did the Democratic one.
How important are the appointments that he is about to make, James?
Well, they're very terribly important. I mean, he was not able to attract top people to his campaign, particularly in the area of foreign policy, defense, and security. Back in March, as he started to rise through the primaries and be successful, about 120 luminaries that are normally on the Republican side of these things said, we will never advise his campaign nor ever work in his administration. Now, I imagine a number of those signatories are probably rethinking that, perhaps maybe through a combination of patriotism and knowing that terrific jobs are up for bids. But I think he's actually going to have quite a bit of trouble finding very good people for his administration, just as he did in staffing up people traditionally skilled in campaigning as well.
All right, we'll find out soon. We're out of time, but thank you all for joining us tonight.
Pleasure.